Welcome to Ladybird Readers. If you enjoyed looking and listening to my books, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Thank you. Disney's Winnie the Pooh and Too Much Honey. Published in 1991, a Ladybird book. Christopher Robin and Pooh. Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin were great friends. They lived in a wonderful world of their own, where grown-ups never came. It was called the 100-Acre Wood, in the middle of the forest, and lots of other friends lived there too. There was Piglet, Kanga, Roo, Eeyore, Tigger, and Rabbit, and they all knew one another very well. Sometimes Winnie the Pooh was called Pooh Bear, and other times just Bear or Pooh. He often had adventures in the 100-Acre Wood, but what Pooh liked most of all was eating honey, as much as he could get. Pooh always liked honey for his elevensies. He called it time for a little something. One day the honey pot was empty. Christopher Robin had forgotten to fill it, and Pooh was quite cross. Trying to forget how hungry he was, Pooh made his way to an old tree trunk. It was one of his thoughtful spots, where he did his best to think really hard. It wasn't easy, especially when he was hungry. Today, though, the thoughts came buzzing, and then, "That's not my thoughts at all," said Pooh. "It's a bee." And that made him think about honey again, because bees make honey. A little something with Rabbit. Pooh stood up and looked around. He was still thinking. Someone in the forest must have some honey. Then all of a sudden he thought of Rabbit. Rabbit always had honey, and he usually had a little something himself for elevensies. "I'll go and see Rabbit," Pooh said aloud. "He's sure to have some honey." He began to walk towards Rabbit's house, and Rabbit heard him coming. "Help," he thought. "If Pooh knows I'm in, he'll eat all my honey." So he kept very quiet when Pooh called. "Anyone at home?" Pooh waited a moment. When he heard there was no answer, he called once more. "Rabbit, are you there?" Again Rabbit didn't answer, but when Pooh called a third time, Rabbit said, "No, there's no one here." Pooh was puzzled. How could anyone say, "No, there's no one here," if there was no one there? So he looked inside the hole. The first thing he saw was Rabbit. "Hello, Rabbit," he said. "I just thought I'd pop round to see you." Rabbit was always polite. "Hello, Pooh," he said. "How nice to see you. I was just going to have my elevensies. Would you like a little something?" "Oh, how kind of you, Rabbit," said Pooh. "Come to think of it, it is about that time." "What would you like?" asked Rabbit. "Some bread and honey, or would you prefer condensed milk?" "Oh, just honey will do nicely," said Pooh, settling down at the table. "I'm very fond of honey." Rabbit went over to the cupboard and took out his pot of honey. It was nearly full because Rabbit had been saving it as a treat. He carried it across the table and gave some to Pooh. Pooh looked down at his plate, disappointed. "Could I have a little more, do you think?" he asked. Rabbit thumped the pot down on the table. "You better help yourself, I suppose," he said. "Why, thank you, Rabbit," said Pooh. It was one of the best elevensies Pooh's had ever had. His little something turned into a very big something in the end. At last Pooh said, "Well, it's about time I was going, Rabbit." "Don't you want any more, Pooh?" asked Rabbit. I don't think there's any left, said Pooh. Rabbit turned the pot upside down. Nope, you're right, he said sadly. I didn't think there was, said Pooh. Goodbye, and thank you very much. And he began to climb out of Rabbit's hole. Half in, half out. The next moment, all Rabbit could see was Pooh's fat little legs waving in the air. He was stuck fast in the doorway. Pooh shouted back to Rabbit, "Why don't you have a bigger front door? Now look what's happened." Rabbit was really cross. "It's just the right size for me. Anyway, you got in all right. It's your own fault, Pooh, for being so greedy. If you hadn't eaten all that honey, you wouldn't be stuck now." Pooh went on trying as hard as he could to get out, but it was no use. After a minute or two, he asked hopefully, "Rabbit, do you think you could give me a push?" Rabbit sighed. He was so cross with Pooh for eating all his honey, he didn't want to help at all. But he pushed and pushed as hard as he could for ages, and it was no good. Then he went out of his back door and ran to the front of the house to try pull Pooh out. But that was no good either. Nothing was going to get Pooh through the front door. At last, Rabbit gave up. "Well, there's only one thing for it," he said. "I better go see if Christopher Robin can help." He ran off to find him. Left to himself, Pooh felt quite lonely. It was no fun being stuck in Rabbit's doorway underneath a sign saying Rabbit's house. "What on earth are you doing there, Pooh?" asked Owl, flying down to Rabbit's doorway. "You're not stuck, are you?" "Not really," Pooh said airily. "I was just having a little nap." Owl laughed at him. "Oh, that's a fine story," he said, "but I can see you're stuck fast. I better get someone who can dig you out." The gopher takes a look. At that moment, a gopher came along, his big front teeth gleaming in the sunshine. Did you say you need someone who knows about digging?" he said. "Let's see if I can help." He climbed all around Pooh, whose nose twitched unhappily. Pooh had never seen a gopher in the forest before. Where had this one come from? Once the gopher had taken a good look at the doorway, he stood back, deep in thought. Then he said to Owl, "Main problem here is this bear. It's his fault that no one can get in or out." Pooh growled deep in his throat. The gopher moved back a step, and Pooh said slowly and carefully, "It doesn't matter whose fault it is. Can you get me out?" "Oh, I just dig," said the gopher hurriedly. "I don't know anything about getting bears out." And with that, he disappeared. Help is at hand. Now Pooh began to get very worried. He was getting very tired of looking at the same view all the time. Was he going to be stuck here forever, never again to wander in the forest looking for honey? Where, oh where was Christopher Robin? Pooh's greatest friend was on his way, and soon he was talking to Pooh. "It's all right," said Christopher Robin. "We'll soon have you out." First, Christopher Robin pulled all by himself, and then Rabbit helped him. But it was still no good. Pooh was stuck fast, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to move him. In the end, when it began to rain, Christopher Robin gave up. "Oh, I don't know what we're going to do, Pooh," he said. "We're certainly not going to get you out by pulling." He looked down at Pooh and he thought about the problem. "Oh, there's only one way to do it. You're not going to like it, Pooh. You'll just have to stay there until you get thin again. Rabbit was nearly as unhappy as Pooh when he went back into his house and saw Pooh's legs still waving in the air. Well, if he's going to be there for months, he thought, I'm going to have to do something about it. It's hardly a beautiful sight. Suddenly he had an idea. I know, he said to himself, I'll make him into a picture. So he put a frame around Pooh's back end and put a flower on his bottom. Then he changed his mind and painted a face on Pooh's bottom and added twigs to make it look like antlers. Rabbit was feeling pleased with himself when the picture was finished. He thought it was quite good. Kanga and Roo come visiting. While Rabbit was painting his picture, Kanga and Roo had heard Pooh was in trouble, and they'd come to visit. Roo had bought some flowers. When Pooh saw that they hadn't brought him anything to eat, he wasn't as grateful for the flowers as he should have been. Waiting to grow thinner was boring, and it was making him distinctly cross. All the same, he knew his friends were being very kind, so he did his best to be polite and admire their present. Someone to talk to. Kanga and Roo stayed with Pooh until tea time, and then they set off home. The thought of tea made Pooh realise how hungry he was. Then he had to stop thinking about that because it was going to be a long, long time before he could have anything to eat again. Suddenly Pooh heard a rustling noise nearby. What could it be? It turned out to be Eeyore. I'll stay with you for a while if you like, Pooh, he offered. Oh, thank you, Eeyore, said Pooh gratefully. That's very kind of you. Well, said Eeyore, I might as well. My part of the forest is damp. It's not much better here, but at least we can chat. Pooh was glad Eeyore was there, although Eeyore had never been the most cheerful company in the world. So Pooh decided it was time for a song, and this is what he sang. Cottleston, Cottleston, Cottleston pie. A fly can't bird, but a bird can fly. Ask me a riddle and I reply. Cottleston, Cottleston, Cottleston pie. Cottleston, Cottleston, Cottleston pie. A fish can't whistle and neither can I. Ask me a riddle and I reply. Cottleston, Cottleston, Cottleston pie. Cottleston, Cottleston, Cottleston pie. White as a chicken, I don't know why. Ask me a riddle and I reply. Cottleston, Cottleston, Cottleston pie. Pooh enjoyed singing, and his song made him feel a lot less gloomy. Eeyore seemed to feel better too. He almost managed to smile. That wasn't at all bad, I must say, Pooh, he said. You're quite good at that sort of thing. Pooh was encouraged by this, so he made up a poem about an empty honey pot he had some home. It's very, very funny, 'cause I know I had some honey, 'cause it had a label on saying honey. A galoptious full-up pot too. I don't know where it's got to. Now I don't know where it's gone. Well, it's funny. By the time Pooh had finished his poem, it was starting to grow cold and dark. Christopher Robin came along with a scarf to keep Pooh's ears warm. Oh, I'm awfully bored, Christopher Robin, said Pooh gloomily. There must be something I can do while I'm stuck here. Can't you think of anything? But it was no good. Christopher Robin couldn't think of a single thing to help. Even with Eeyore to keep him company, the cold, dark night seemed never-ending. But at last the sun rose, and Christopher Robin and all Pooh's friends gathered round to see if they could help. At Pooh's other end, Brett Rabbit was inside his house having breakfast. Suddenly, he saw Pooh move, and he rushed through his back door and round to tell the others. Perhaps I'll get my front door back now, he thought. Everyone gathered round to take a good look at Pooh and try to remember what he had looked like before. Was he thinner? Then they decided Yes, he was. Pooh is set free. Now, what is the best way to get Pooh out? Wondered Christopher Robin. I know. I'll put my foot on the bank like this. You stand behind me, Rabbit, and then we'll both pull together. Christopher Robin and Rabbit pulled as hard as they could, but Pooh stayed stuck. Then everyone else got behind Rabbit in a long line and pulled as well. That did the trick. Pop! Pooh flew straight into the air and into the honey tree, head first. Pooh looked around happily. I don't mind being here a bit stuck for a while with all this lovely honey, he thought. It's not at all like being stuck in Rabbit's doorway. Then he suddenly remembered that he hadn't had anything to eat for a long time. The honey tree was just the place for him. Pooh stays put. Down below, Pooh's friends were wondering how to get him out once more. Then Christopher Robin climbed up to talk to him. I'm quite happy here for a moment, Christopher Robin, Pooh said stickily. This is the nicest honey I've ever tasted. All right, Pooh. We'll let you stay here just now, but only for a little while. You must only have a little something, you know. Oh, I will, promised Pooh. Didn't want to be stuck in the tree forever, but it was nice honey. Pooh was quite greedy, really. He ate all the honey he could, and that was much more than a little something. When Christopher Robin got him down from the tree at last, Pooh was so full he could hardly walk. But he was so happy he sang his favourite song. Winnie the Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, tubby little cubby all stuffed with fluff. I'm Winnie the Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, willy-nilly silly old bear. For the rest of his life, Winnie the Pooh was going to remember the time he'd eaten so much honey that he ended up in a very tight spot indeed. There are many more stories about Pooh and his other friends to meet. Grown-ups think all these stories are make-believe, and that Christopher Robin's friends are only stuffed toys. But you and I know better, don't we? Of course we do. As sure as there's 100 acre wood.